Mark, you're not really a Jeremy Corbyn fan, are you? In fact, you did spend a lot of his speech in the Commons trying to interrupt, earning this rebuke from the Speaker.
I gently say to the honourable member for Winchester and to the honourable gentleman, the member for Sherwood, that they can have a go, but if the right honourable gentleman doesn't want to give way, they will not advance their cause by shouting, and that in itself is uncivil.
So you had a go, and we're all ears now. What were you so desperate to say in there?
Well, I mean, several things, to be honest. The fact that he wouldn't take any interventions was enormously frustrating. It's the first time I've ever seen a leader of the opposition do that. And I think if you compare that to the Prime Minister, who just took lots of interventions from all around the House, not afraid of the debate, and I think that was the frustrating thing.
But what were you trying to say?
Well, I mean,
you kept
lots of different things. But first of all, I wanted him to rule out a rise in income tax for a start, because I think he was talking about working families, and working families in my constituency want to keep as much of their wages as they possibly can. They don't want to see their tax bills going up. But there were several points at which I wanted to make points about what mattered to my constituents, and very frustrating that he wouldn't take a single intervention.
And how did you feel about the rebuke you got?
No, I mean, that's par for the course, I'm afraid, isn't it? You know, I think I've never been a shy and retiring violet. You know, I think, unfortunately, Jeremy just wasn't wanting to engage in the debate. And whether that's because he hasn't got confidence in his arguments, I don't know.
Is he not confident, Lord Bark?
I think the one thing he has got is confidence in his arguments. You can agree with them or disagree with them, but I think he has confidence in his arguments. I'm sorry Mark was so upset, but I think he'll get over it.
I think he probably will, don't you?
I think I have. But, you know, I think if you're a politician who's putting forward ideas for the country, you have to be able to defend those views, and you have to be able to take a question and give the answer and supply a credible argument. And the Prime Minister is very good at that, and Jeremy clearly couldn't do that.
Why aren't Labour further ahead, Willie?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons. I think Labour should be further ahead. I think there's a number of reasons. I think the country's getting used to the new Labour leadership. I think that will take time. It could go either way. I accept that. But I think the government actually is in some trouble and really ought to be many more points behind. And it's our job in the Labour Party to make sure that that happens. And I think it will in the course of the next year or so. I think we'll find the Conservatives have quite a few defeats and Labour surprise you. OK, well, next, allegations around the election expenses of many of our East Midlands MPs, including studio guest Mark Spencer, have been growing for weeks. Police in Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire are waiting for more information before deciding whether to investigate claims that expenses for Conservative candidates were not properly registered. The Conservatives hit back, though, this week, claiming that Labour will face the same problems for its campaign. Our political editor, Tony Rowe, has been taking a closer look.
This is a story which begins in Newark. Questions over hotel expenses for Conservative activists in the 2014 by-election. Not declared properly, it was alleged. Last week, the Conservative Party were taken to court over the non-disclosure of documents. This is the number 4 bus stop in Nottingham. It was a Channel 4 investigation by Michael Crick. He then moved on to the general election and expenses involving battle buses in particular, and the amount of money claimed by activists on those buses for hotel expenses put down as a national expense, even though it should have been put down as a local one. One of those marginal destinations was Broxtowe, the seat of Anna Soubry, the business minister. Now, she has said that unfortunately there was a cock-up, as she puts it, in the claiming of national expenses for hotel costs. She says in a statement that the party has apologised to the Electoral Commission and submitted that expense. So what of Labour? All parties have long held traditions of having battle buses, including for the EU vote. Well, Andrew Bridgen, the Conservative MP for North West Leicestershire, says Labour had battle buses in marginals, so they should be investigated too.
We need to have a robust enforcement of electoral law to give the voting population confidence in our electoral system and let all the parties know exactly where they stand. And it's clear that maybe all the parties have interpreted the rules incorrectly, but they've all interpreted it the same way.
Labour say their spending was within the law and within the rules set out by the Electoral Commission. Breaching election spending limits is a serious offence punishable by imprisonment or a heavy fine. How serious is this? Well, there are 10 police forces on board investigating 30 constituencies.
Well, as you can see, Tony is with us now in the studio. So how much money are we actually talking about here, Tony?
Well, if you put it into context, we're talking about nationally £38,000. In the Midlands, for the seats there, we're talking about £13,000 in hotel accommodation in Tamworth, where they were based 35 people over 10 nights.
That's what they were put up.
So yeah, so it's not huge, and also you need to put it into context with the amount of Conservative spending nationally on the election, where that money should have come from, and they were £3 million underspent.
OK. Well, Mark, Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire police have gathered some evidence, but they have told us that they haven't ruled out an investigation, but they're still waiting for more information, still waiting for more evidence from the Electoral Commission before they decide whether to proceed with it. You're reported to be fairly relaxed about this. An investigation's not good news, though, is it? Let's face it.
No, I mean, I think it's worth considering, actually, that all political parties have these buses that go around the country. We all independently came to the same conclusion that this was a national expense. That was the clear guidance that came from central office to me in an email, which said this bus is arriving, it's a national expense. The only thing that I need to declare is the cost of the leaflets that they were distributing on the day, which we did. So it seems fairly clear that we all political parties understood this should be a national expense. The mistake, I think, was the hotel bills weren't declared nationally, but the cost of the coach was.
So you're saying basically that you did nothing wrong as far as the buses were concerned. Have the police spoken to you?
No, not at all. I've had an email which says where they're at, which pretty much what you've just sort of indicated. I think we need the Electoral Commission to give us a bit more guidance on how they see it and how they seem to be suggesting it might be a local expense, because if all political parties, independently of each other, have come to the same conclusion, that says to me that actually they've read the rules and all come to that decision that it should have been a national expense. So I think that's where we're at.
Well, as well as calling it a cock-up, Roxtowe MP Anna Soubry is at pains to say that she and her election agent have done nothing wrong, have nothing to hide, are happy to help with any investigation. She said she was told from the outset that the expenses for the battle bus would be registered as national spending, which is what you're saying too, Mark. So cock-up or conspiracy here, Willie Bark? Is it really likely that parties would deliberately, and let's face it, rather publicly, do something like this to gain advantage? I mean, there's no secret about battle buses. You can't hide them.
It's not about battle buses at all. My party has already had, which used a small bus in the East Midlands, has already had that declared national by the Electoral Commission as a national spend. It's about the hotel accommodation. And if there are going to be police inquiries into that, I think it's best to say very little at this stage. Not for me to say whether it's cock-up or conspiracy. It's rather odd that it should have happened, but I'm not sure it's the greatest thing in the world.
Oh, well, Mark was implying that no parties are immune from this, really.
Well, we are immune from the accommodation. There's no question of the Labour Party being involved in not declaring accommodation expenses in hotels. There weren't any. And that's what this issue is about.
Okay.
And it's one for the Conservative Party to sort out with the Electoral Commission.
You can't tell me, Willie, that Ed Miliband didn't stay in a hotel at some point during the election campaign, and you clearly can't attribute that to the next seat that he visits the next day. I think we have to recognise that that national campaign was the one that was delivering these coaches for all political parties, and that's where the expense should have been registered.
But why didn't you declare the hotels? That's what I can't understand.
Well, and that's the mistake, which the party, central office, has put their hands up and said we should have declared the hotels.
And there's obviously a lot more to be looked into on this, as the Electoral Commission has said.
But it did happen before too. I mean, there was the question of the Newark by-election,
yes,
of course, that we can't forget that happened a year or so before the general election, and I think that's probably still a current issue. But let's see what the result is before we all rush to judgment.
Okay.
I think there are muddy issues as well about the rules, about what is a local campaign, what is part of the national campaign, and I find it very confusing, really, just looking from the outside, because I think Channel 4 said that in Sherwood, people who came on the battle bus were being briefed about local issues before they spoke to people. Well, if that's against the rules, you sort of wonder why.
Are the rules out of date?
Well, I mean, I think clearly it's very difficult to allocate where those budgets go. So if the National Party puts up a big Vote Conservative poster in Sherwood, is that assisting my campaign? Well, clearly, because I'm a member of the party, gain some use out of it.
Because the party decided to draft in activists in this case, do you feel a bit let down by the party, by the National Party on this? Because you can't exactly turn around and say, do you know what, I don't want them coming into my patch. You wouldn't, would you? Let's face it.
And you're part of that big machine and you accept the guidance which comes from the centre, and the guidance was very clear that this was part of the national expenditure and that's where it sits. So, as Willie said, I think we need to wait and see what the Electoral Commission and the police come up with, and then we'll act appropriately.
I think there's a bigger issue here, of course. This is an issue for today, but there's a bigger issue around party funding that hasn't been sorted out yet, and it's really beyond time that it's sorted out.
Okay.
I think the worry is that much too much money is spent on our elections, and people are free to give huge donations. And that's something we have to sort out. And it's best done consensually. It's got to be done by the three parties working together on that.
Okay. Briefly, what next for this investigation, Tony?
Well, as you said earlier, we wait to see what the Electoral Commission decides to do.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Now, experts in the East Midlands are warning that a ban on legal highs, which comes into effect next week, won't be enough to solve the problem. The drugs which are readily available are linked to crime and violence, particularly in prisons. Here's our political reporter, Peter Saull.
20-year-old Katrina Widowson used to come here a lot, but not to enjoy the view.
From that first session of smoking it was just such a laugh, and from where the place I was, it just brought me out of that darkness, if you know what I mean, and it just brightened up my day, because I would always be laughing at something, or I'd always be laughing at someone being mambered, or do you know what I mean? It was just fun then, you know, but now I think about it, it's evil. It really is, it's evil, it's horrible stuff.
She, like many others, has experimented with the cannabis substitute Black Mamba. It is, for the next few days at least, legal, but the effects have taken their toll.
Because I was withdrawing, because I had no Mamba, all I could think about was that the devil was coming to get me. And obviously with having, you know, borderline personality, anxiety and depression as well, with all the thoughts that I've already got going on inside my head, I've got this, oh, the devil's coming to get you. The devil's coming, he's coming. Do you know what I mean? And it made me to the point where I thought I was actually losing my head and I was going to explode.
I went to a couple of these so-called head shops in the Nottingham area who told me they no longer sold Black Mamba. But there are a myriad of websites offering next-day delivery. This packet, for example, cost me just under £8. And many of these sites offer discounts if you buy in bulk before the blanket ban comes into force this week.
It'll make a difference in the sales in the shops, you won't get it so obvious, but we've got a lot of other drugs, you know, like heroin and cocaine are Class A and illegal, and no one has a problem getting hold of them, so I really don't see as it's going to make the problem go away.
Critics also point out flaws in the legislation.
It's going to be difficult to enforce. We don't have a good system for picking it up in tests, so how are you going to police it? It doesn't decriminalise possession, but there's a slight absurdity to it because you've got a substance like cannabis which is criminalised, and then you've got the substances that mimic it that are much more problematic that is not criminalised.
Katrina is now recovering from her addiction to Black Mamba, but believes a ban will make very little difference to others.
There's too much of it out there now. It's been going on for too long. There's too many people addicted to it. You need like a big, massive Mamba hoover to suck every bit of Mamba out of nuts and then just keep at it and keep it going.
From prisons to nightclubs to the streets of our towns and cities, substances like these are endemic. As ever, when it comes to drugs, there is no silver bullet.
Well, Mark Spencer, this new legislation comes into effect next week, making it illegal to supply the drugs but not to possess them. Is it going far enough? Is it strong enough?
Yeah, I think so, and I think clearly it's a step in the right direction. We need to take action over these illegal highs. They're having, as you've seen, an enormous impact in society, and I think the government's done the right thing in legislating to make the supply of them illegal.
Why?
Well, because clearly they're affecting people's mental health, they're affecting people's physical health, and they're having a really detrimental effect on people in communities. And I think the government has a responsibility to try and protect those people who become victims of these drugs, to stop them being sold these illegal substances.
It's going to be up to PCCs like yourself, Willie Bark, to enforce this. Can you actually enforce it? Is it enforceable?
Well, we'll see. I very much hope that it is enforceable, and actually I have to say that we agree that this is a necessary piece of legislation. It seems to have been pretty well drafted.
It's taken a long time to come through, hasn't it?
It has
Very complex.
Probably taken a bit long, but it is complex. It's well thought out, I think. But there's no guarantee that it will work. We'll have to say that. But much better to try, because we do not want lives ruined or destroyed by these drugs that have caused such havoc already. So any government, I think, has a responsibility to act. I agree with Mark on that.
And as a PCC, how much police time, money and energy is taken up with drug misuse?
Well, a huge amount is taken up with drug misuse generally, but as far as this is concerned, there'll be a number of different organisations, including the police, trading standards, who will be able to act under the rules of the sections of the Act. And that's important. But there are also civil penalties as well, and that's important because this isn't going to be some draconian piece of legislation suddenly coming in and imprisoning loads and loads of people. It will be possible for there to be civil sanctions, such as orders of various kinds, which will make it possible for people to get a warning, to be told, don't do it again, don't sell it again.
Right,
and it needs to be put into effect proportionately.
Okay, well,
and I'm sure that's what will happen in Leicestershire and in the other police forces.
On the subject of prisons, clearly they do have a problem with drugs. As we've been hearing, the BBC reported this week that there's been a 52% increase in call-outs to prisons since 2011, and this is largely being put down to the use of legal highs. Staff are being attacked, ambulances are being called out every 20 minutes, and now you say that more legal high addicts are going to end up in prisons with the other people already in there.
So the first stage was to make them illegal, because of course we were in a position where actually prisoners could be in possession of these chemicals and actually wouldn't be committing a criminal act in itself, in that they weren't an illegal substance. So, but take the first step and make them illegal, then you have to deal with the challenge of how they're getting into prisons in the first place.
And that is a huge challenge, isn't it?
Well, congratulations to the BBC. I mean, the Wandsworth prison, as shown by the BBC, has been, I think, an absolute revelation and a shock to all viewers. And it is about time that something was done about the prison system in this country. And of course, these sort of legal highs, or otherwise known as lethal highs, are a major part of this problem, but not the only part of the problem, but they have to be dealt with.
What do you make of the government's plans to reform prisons?
Well, I think they come rather late, but I think they're welcome. But let's see, the real problem is that there's such a shortage now of prison officers, and there needs to be many more prison officers. And the real question is, can the government scheme, which I'm sure is well-intentioned, can it work by having so many people in prison as there are at the present time?
Yes.
It is certainly beyond time to
look
look at our prison system. It's clearly, just look at the BBC this week, it's clearly not working.
No, and what's going to be done about it? Are we going to see more prison officers in prison?
Prisons have to be a place of rehabilitation. We need to make sure that people who go through the prison system are much less likely to reoffend when they're released, and we need to work with those prisoners to give them the skills to survive outside of prison.
They also need to be controlled, and there need to be enough prison officers looking after them.
So we need to make sure that those people who clearly don't want to engage in the system and don't want to better themselves are kept secure and not allowed to injure or affect other people, and those people who want to change the direction of their life are given the tools and the skills to change direction when they leave.
What about overcrowding? Because Edward Garnier, the former Attorney General and Harborough MP, said, laudable as the government's plans are, nothing of lasting value, he says, can be done to reform and improve conditions in prisons until overcrowding, which Willie Bark says is the big problem.
Yeah, and I acknowledge that there are some challenges around that, but then you need to look at how you're dealing with those criminals. Not all of them need to go to prison in the first place, and if you can rehabilitate people, you can get them out and going straight instead of committing crime.
Huge issue.